Welcome to the 2024 Presidential Race Review. I'm your host, Lisa Schiffren. I'm a former Republican speechwriter, and with me today is David Eisenbach, the professor of presidential history at Columbia University. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Lisa.
So, we are looking at a very tight presidential race, and it's kind of crazy. It's been crazy so far.
It's been crazy. We have an incumbent president getting bounced out of his nomination. It then goes to his vice president. And we have an assassination attempt. And now we have this incredibly tight contest.
Lots of drama. The polls are very tight between Trump and Harris.
Yeah.
But they're all going in his direction. And the betting markets seem to have Trump winning right now. Harris got no convention bump in the polls. What do you make of this, and how do you see it playing out?
She got a bump in terms of where Joe Biden was versus Trump to where she got versus Trump. But she really should have gotten a better bump out of her convention. And she didn't get that bump, and it hasn't maintained. So she's going to have to do something to shake it up. And I'm sure they're looking at the debate as the big moment.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The debate is clearly a big moment, and she's not the odds-on favorite to win that.
Debates are tricky things. How aggressively does Trump go at her? Right, that can work against him. How much of a performance? Because the expectation is that Trump's going to do much better than her. So if she overperforms, that can go to her benefit. That's what makes debates kind of tricky to predict.
Yeah, if Trump is getting good advice, he won't be aggressive with her.
I agree with that.
He'll do what he did with Biden and just be kind of level, talking about policy and making the case for his accomplishments, I think.
I agree, right? Because he also has his own presidency, right, to run on.
Right, that's right.
So he can go to those accomplishments. He can go to the failures of the Biden administration. He doesn't even have to go after her. He can go after Joe Biden, right, because that's his case, right? So I think that
I think it needs to be about her a little bit because Biden, he's not running against Biden.
Right, but she's carrying on now the policies of the Biden administration.
Although you'd never know that to watch her campaign.
Well, if she has dumped Biden's policies, she hasn't made that clear. So until that moment where she takes, starts to question Joe Biden's policies, she's got that around her. So he can just kind of leave off her, which I think is the smart move. We're dealing with swing voters here. These are people who aren't policy oriented, right? They have feelings about candidates. So you don't want to antagonize them with any sort of negative feelings towards,
people may not be policy oriented in a technical sense, but I think people are very sensitive to things like inflation or immigration or a crime wave. Those are policy issues, and she's got to defend her position on that.
And that's what he should go after, not personal attacks, right? It should be about what's going on in terms of policies, and there's plenty of stuff to trigger people with.
Is Tim Walz an asset for Kamala Harris or a liability? What exactly does he bring to the ticket? His views on Gaza are troubling. His lying about his military record alienates veterans. And his far-left political record, which includes letting Minneapolis burn during the George Floyd riots, is problematic. How does he help Harris?
I think he helps with the Midwest. I think that he has that kind of Midwest sort of solid. Stolid
is better than solid.
Personality. There's a kind of happy, kind of regular guy kind of quality to him. I do think that helps with Midwestern voters. And that's enough, right? I mean, for a vice president, first off, it's just do no harm. Secondly, does he bring any states? Probably not, but I think he does help with her numbers in the Midwest.
I would say that the one thing he helps with is that he's actually got executive experience, and she has none. I mean, he's been a governor, and she has only been a senator and a prosecutor.
That's right.
So I think that actually, in theory, could help. But what he's done with his governorship, when the details come out, which they don't necessarily come out, when they come out, it's, I think, troubling to lots of voters.
Yeah, again, right, he's not at the top of the ticket. But if media were to press on the divisions between Kamala's stance on a number of issues versus Walz's stance, we haven't gotten any of that.
Right. Well, because we haven't gotten any interviews. But let me, before we go to that, let me just ask you, what do you think about J.D. Vance? Is he an asset or a liability to Trump?
You know, I think, again, I think that we tend to overplay how significant the vice president nominee is in terms of an election. It certainly was significant in terms of Dan Quayle, but we're not dealing with that right now.
Not necessarily in a beneficial way.
No. I mean, it can be a big negative, you know. I don't think that's the case here. I think that really it's down to Kamala versus Trump.
Right.
In both cases.
So you think J.D. Vance? I think J.D. Vance, I find him interesting to watch. I was not a fan of the choice because I thought he was too young and was not ready to step into the Oval Office should something happen to Trump, which you have to think about because Trump's not young. But I think J.D. Vance is fantastically articulate in a way that Trump really isn't.
Yes, and he knows his facts better than Trump knows his facts. So it will be interesting to see the Walz J.D. Vance debate.
I think
I'm looking forward to that one.
That one strikes me as more interesting than Kamala and Trump.
You're going to get more policy out of that discussion.
Right.
Okay. Because both of them seem to have a better handle on policy than the nominees.
Right. Well, J.D. Vance hasn't been a football coach, so he's a little young for that.
I think the J.D. Vance pick came, at a moment when Trump was feeling very, very strong and wanted somebody that was essentially an anointing of a successor.
Right.
Who was going to carry on the Trump model of republicanism. Right? When J.D. Vance says the Republican Party is no longer the party of Wall Street, is now the party of Main Street, there were a lot of Republicans that weren't comfortable with that line. And so that was Trump saying, this is my party now.
No, it's true. He is, for a guy who's so very intelligent and intellectual, he is a populist in his policy preferences. So that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Yesterday, it was announced that New York Judge Juan Merchan would not sentence Trump till late November after the election. Yeah. Obviously, that's good news for the Trump campaign. Does it matter that Trump was convicted in the hush money case? Does it actually hurt him with voters?
I think part of the problem is there are so many different cases. It's very hard for
that's the one he's been convicted of.
I know, but for your swing voter, and the game right now is just these swing voters.
That's right.
It's too much. They're not following this. They don't know about this latest conviction. They don't know about this latest case. For them, it's immaterial.
But when Kamala can stand up and say, I'm a prosecutor and he's a felon, does that actually hurt, or does that just confirm the biases of her base?
Well, I think that opens the door up to her record as a prosecutor. Trump's been very strong about going after her prosecution of people for marijuana, incarcerating, thousands. This has been a major point of attack, and it is something that hurts him with quite a few people who would be swing voters.
How do you mean it hurts him?
Well, I think that when you bring up the same way Tulsi Gabbard brought up her track record, putting black men in jail for
minor
something
offenses
that is now legal.
Right.
Okay, then that's a vulnerability, and that's a key when we're dealing with very small numbers in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania in terms of what they need to win those key states. That line of argument and that issue, her record as a prosecutor doesn't necessarily carry to all communities.
Meanwhile, Hunter Biden's guilty plea on tax evasion gives life to the case that the Bidens are corrupt. Even though Biden is not the candidate anymore, what effect does this have on how the parties are perceived?
I don't think it has any effect. I think that because Biden's no longer the nominee, Hunter Biden is out of the news.
It seems outrageous that Harris won't answer media questions about her policies in the White House or much of anything else, or do real unscripted interviews. How do you justify that unwillingness to be forthright with the American people? And don't you worry about her performance as president if she can't answer for herself in public?
Well, it definitely does raise questions about that. I think strategy-wise, it's smart, right? She's not a great interview. And if you know that, if you're managing the campaign and you see that the personality is connecting with voters. I mean, the fact was that she did get a big bump when she took over the nomination. It looked much better for Democrats than it ever did with Joe Biden. So just carrying on this idea, she has a nice kind of bearing as this joyful kind of fighter, not on the specifics, but giving people, those swing voters who are more about feelings than they are about policies, a sense of somebody who's going to bring positive vibes to the presidency. I think that was a good strategy. And, once you get into the weeds of policy, you start to lose people.
Well, it has its
swing
limits.
voters.
The idea of a vibes election has some very severe limits.
Absolutely, it's got limits. But you deal with the candidate you got. You don't deal with some imaginary candidate that you would hope for. And if she's getting a nice bounce off of good vibes versus Trump's negative vibes, then you stick with that as long as you can. And that's seems to be the strategy of her campaign.
I think you've made the best possible case for having no opinions on public policy.
It's not a bad policy for any politician to say as little bit about it as possible to on issues that are going to lose support one way or another. Allow the voters to think they know where you stand rather than actually articulating a position which will antagonize people.
I don't consider myself much of a feminist, but as a woman, it offends me that she's getting away with not having any substance.
Yeah.
It literally offends me that she can give taco recipes and make small talk with Tim Walz, and that somehow counts for these vibes and the joy. The joy, joy has more to do with having a low inflation rate and not having immigrants pouring over the border and not having crime in your cities.
Well, again, any discussion about inflation or migrants is not a favorable discussion for Kamala. So she doesn't want to get into that. And it would be dumb for her to get into any of that. So stick with the good vibes and you might have a chance at riding the wave into the White House.
I find it shocking.
I'm not saying it's right, by the way. It's more of a strategy than...
No, it's clearly a strategy. Whereas Trump has a lot of substance on his part. He has all of his accomplishments in office, including low inflation, low crime, the lowest border crossings of any president in recent history. It strikes me as weird and unfair that this is not...
Lisa, that's politics.
No, clearly it's
weird
politics.
and unfair.
It's clearly politics. I'm sorry, we are going to have to take a break for a public service announcement. We'll be right back. Thank you for watching us today. This is the 2024 Presidential Race Review, and I'm Lisa Schiffren, your host, here with David Eisenbach, Professor of Presidential History at Columbia University. And we're talking about how outrageous it is that Kamala Harris is getting away with running a policy-free campaign in a country where policy matters. You were saying.
Well, first off, I think it's a smart strategy on her part to run a policy-free campaign, because there's a lot of stuff going on in the United States: inflation, the migration crisis, foreign policy issues, that
all of which is traceable to her administration,
to the Biden administration, of which she is member, and she, doesn't want to have to defend the problems. So it's a smart strategy to stay away from it. And historically, it's really important for us to see how important the introduction of television in the 1960 campaign, Kennedy versus Nixon, how important that was in terms of shaping how presidential campaigns often will run away from discussing policy and emphasize image.
Well, I mean, what's funny about this campaign is that you could say this about both candidates. Trump is talking policy because he's got a record of 4 years of accomplishment, but he also is a candidate who relies on charisma to, for his support. His base loves him. His base feels very strongly attached to him in the same way that a lot of Kamala's supporters feel with her.
Yes.
So it's just odd that he's getting the benefit of being a policy wonk when he is no such thing in real life.
And by the way, when you have such a tight election and you're looking at undecided voters, we're talking about people who don't start paying attention to the election until after Labor Day. We're not talking about people who voted for George W. Bush and voted for Barack Obama and then voted for Donald Trump and then voted for Biden and then are wondering, well, who am I going to vote for now? These are not policy-oriented thinking people. They are more feeling people. They get a vibe from a candidate. So it makes sense that both candidates are putting out the vibes more than the policies.
Right, I guess.
You may not like it.
No,
I don't like it either, but it's just
No,
I
understand that you're not in favor of this particularly. On the specific policy matter of the economy, Kamala appears to be running a campaign about abortion, as far as I can tell. When it comes to the economy, for instance, she doesn't seem to have a firm grasp on tax policy and how it works. She wants to raise taxes on people and businesses, tax unrealized capital gains, and throw subsidies at small businesses. She's definitely for big spending, which is how we got to this point in inflation to begin with. The Green New Deal bill that they passed with her backing, spending trillions of dollars, kind of inflated the economy. Right. How does she, when she is pushed, which I presume she will be at the debate next week, how does she actually fob off this disastrous Biden economy without repudiating Joe Biden?
Well, she can't.
Okay.
So you could, one choice would be to distance yourself from Biden, right? The other choice is keep on going the way the Democrats have been going, and largely the media, which is denying that there are really any problems. Inflation is coming down, right? Unemployment at record lows. Now, your average American understands these numbers are problematic. Your average economist understands these numbers are problematic. Inflation is way higher than the official government number. Unemployment is also way higher. Right now, we're counting part-time jobs as full-time jobs or as jobs in jobs reports. And even that's coming down. The jobs report on Friday was devastating to the Biden administration. So you can keep on defending it, pretend like everything is fine, or acknowledge it and now start to differentiate yourself from Biden. That actually might be helpful to her.
It might be helpful. I wonder if she has the backbone to do that.
That's the trick. That's the trick. But this is, one of those pivotal moments. You got to have the backbone. You got to have the facts.
You have to be able to stand there and say, not everything we've done has worked.
That's right.
And instead, she's cheerleading for Bidenomics.
It's a strategy. It's a choice.
What do you think of this week's Not so surprising endorsement by Dick Cheney of Kamala Harris.
I think the Cheneys have done Donald Trump a big service. Again, you have to look at who are the battleground voters right now. One of the major battleground groups is the RFK Democrats, who supported RFK largely because they don't want to be associated with this Democratic Party, which is gung-ho about the war in Ukraine. And they're an anti-war group. And here we have Dick Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris, whereas the only candidate talking about peace is Donald Trump. That is something that goes in Donald Trump's favor, and it works for those RFK Dems. So that was bad for Kamala, the endorsement
It's
of
true.
the Cheneys.
Back in the day, I was a big supporter of Dick Cheney, but he has become, understood to be the warmonger vice president.
It's like there's no war he doesn't like.
Right.
War with Iran, yes. War with Russia, yes.
Iraq, Afghanistan.
The list, and every time there's another potential war with Syria, yes. Libya, yes. Dick Cheney's always there.
Right.
He's like Lindsey Graham.
No, it's true. Although Kamala is backing all the wars that are going on right now. She's very big on Ukraine.
Which speaks to the strange world in which we're living. It's Donald Trump that seems to be the voice of reason on Ukraine. Even on Israel, he, sort of signaled, maybe, it's time for the Israelis to kind of back off. Maybe enough's enough. And I think that's going to work in his favor in November.
So here's the funny one. Donald Trump governed as a moderate populist Republican for 4 years that he was in office.
Well, that's a debatable premise, but go ahead.
You're welcome to debate it. Nothing fascistic or authoritarian happened.
Okay.
He was hounded by Democrats and the Russia hoax, which tied his hands to some extent. Why does this characterization of him as a fascist persist, as an enemy of democracy? What reality is there to it?
It's a shorthand, right? And again, politics isn't fair. It's a shorthand. It's an easy attack. So, that's why they use it.
You want to elaborate? Because
Yeah.
it is an easy attack, and it works.
So
half
that's
the
why they
country
use
seems
it.
to believe he's a threat to democracy, when in fact, we've had an actual term of his presidency,
Yeah.
and there's, no change in our democracy.
Yeah. All I can say is, when you're looking at political moves, oftentimes it's a blood sport, and you go for anything you can.
That's amazing. So you're just saying they do it because it works.
They do it because it works. I'm not justifying anything.
But
I'm not defending him, and I'm just explaining it. That's all.
All right. When I said he governed as a moderate populist Republican, what would you say to that? How would you correct that?
Well, here's what I would say. I think that when he ran in 2016, he was kind of like what J.D. Vance was saying. We should no longer be the party of Wall Street. We should be the party of Main Street. We should actually stand up for American manufacturing jobs instead of surrendering them to corporations that are willing to ship them overseas. I thought that was great stuff. Did it actually transfer to policy when he was in the presidency? We saw these mega tax cuts for corporations. And yeah, he had kind of a pretend trade war with China, but he never really got tough with China. I would hope that...
But tougher with China than any other president in the last...
Well, he talked tougher with
since
China.
Reagan.
Well, that's not saying anything, seeing as every president prior to him just surrendered to
No, that's
China.
true. That's true.
Okay. So, when he comes in, if he comes in, my hope is he doesn't bring in a Secretary of Treasury from Goldman Sachs.
Right.
And that he really does embrace the more populist wing of the Republican Party. And I think that will be good for American workers.
What do you think Kamala Harris's basic view of foreign policy is?
The person or the candidate. I mean, I think the person, she doesn't want any more wars like anyone else, but the candidate, I think she feels that she can't cross Joe Biden. Joe Biden has gotten us deeper and deeper in Ukraine and Israel, and she knows it's hurting her in both cases. And she can't cross Biden. I think that's kind of a mistake. I think she should show her independence by crossing Biden on both those issues, but that's hard to do if you're sitting in the vice presidency.
It is hard to do, and she should do it. Somewhere between 10 and 20 million illegal immigrants have come across the border during the Biden years. This has resulted in crime, rapes, crowded and expensive free housing and medical care in our cities. Harris was placed in charge of that policy and did nothing. She denied it was happening. And Walz has always been radically pro-illegal immigrant. He's even giving them free education in Minnesota. Why would anybody trust Kamala to close the border now?
Was she even talking about closing the border?
Well, she's talking
about getting
making
stronger.
it legal, only going for legal immigration.
Well, it's easier said than done, isn't it?
It is easier said than done, and yet you can come much closer.
Yeah, look, there's no question the migrant issue is going to hurt the Democrats in November, and she's definitely pivoting to the right from and distancing herself from the Biden administration. My suggestion is, politically speaking, I'm not talking about a humanitarian wise. I'm just talking about politics. Emphasize that a bit more. How she actually gets there, that's a policy that you leave that until after you get elected.
Well, she's been advocating the bill that did not actually pass in the Senate, that allowed for 5,000 crossings a day, which would in fact reduce the crossings, but not enough to make a difference.
Yeah, although I have my doubts on that policy in terms of its ultimate effectiveness. But
right, it's obviously a not effective bill.
Yeah.
Which is the only reason the Democrats allowed the Republicans to.
Well, remember that bill was going to be part of the mega
omnibus.
200 omnibus, hundreds of billions of dollars for Ukraine and Israel, and so this is all wrapped up in the politics, not only of the war machine, but also of the 2024 presidential race.
Trump is a traditional law and order candidate. He backs the police and is tough on crime. Harris, despite having been a prosecutor, worked to bail out rioters and looters. What will she do in the Oval Office? If you care about crime, who's your candidate?
If you care about crime, right, then that usually breaks for the Republicans, right? And I'm talking historically breaks for the Republicans. If that's your primary issue. And again, with swing voters, this is one of those issues, right? It's not on a macro scale. It's on a, how do I feel right now? Do I feel safe in my neighborhood? That works against an incumbent if there's a feeling, a general feeling that people aren't safe.
Thank you, David. Thank you for watching. This is Lisa Schiffren signing off for 2024 Presidential Race Review, and please come back next week.